joining us today on our webinar. We have today two friends of ours, Maximiliano Servo and Patti Dares, in order to share a view from the panel they have with us today. I'm very pleased to have them. But before I highlight that, we are having some technical issues on the video, but therefore they will be able to share and pass the content for you via audio and also sharing the screen. Meanwhile, we are fixing the situation here. So one point that I want to emphasize on this presentation, our administration, Faye, has sent to you the report that we just produced in order to help to give you a little bit of guidance of who is your enemy on the cybersecurity side. We from Energia, we want to ensure that we can help you from the cybersecurity mitigations. We've been kind of working with certain clients, important clients on that aspect, in order to comply with regulations and meet the perspective of patch management and all the situations that arises on the cyber. So we are very pleased today to have this presentation, this webinar. We have Patti and also Maximiliano. Maximiliano, let me ask you to talk here. I don't know if you can see us now. Just kind of rejoin him as a panelist. And Maximiliano, do you want to introduce yourself and then share your screen and start the talk?
Yes.
I also want to start to open for chats on the side. You can ask any question there and sending any information that you might like. We are here to help in any form and shape.
Okay, let me just share my screen now.
I can see the screen.
Yeah.
Yep.
Brilliant.
Now I cannot see the screen anymore. You can share the screen if you want.
Okay, let me just see what happened, because I think it's the problem that... There you go. So there we are. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see the PowerPoint.
Not the camera. Okay.
Not the camera.
Okay. So people are not gonna be able to see me, but the message will go through anyway. Do you want me to start, Rafa?
Yeah, let's start, Maximiliano. I'm sorry. The camera is playing up on us today.
Don't worry. Well, thank you very much, Rafa, for for the opportunity, Faye as well. Well, let's speak about today. We're going to speak about securing critical infrastructure for renewable energy projects. I am Massimiliano Servo. I'm a senior associate working for Alvarez and Marsal in infrastructure. I've been working for over 10 years now within the energy sector, specifically in project finance, project development, and how to get sustainable projects into final investment decision. So given this context, we're going to have a session of around 15 minutes, and then we'll be able for Q&A. We're going to have 4 to 5 minutes for Q&A later. So let's begin. Let me just shut this down. Okay, so the moment we're undergoing now is a moment of constant change. there's a saying that I like to quote, which is that disruption is the new normal for energy infrastructure. So why is disruption the new normal? Why are we speaking about something that it's challenging and something that has a negative connotation within the project developments and into the way that we're going to develop projects from now on? It's basically because there are three market trends that are shaping the energy transition, and they're doing this at a very fast pace. On one hand, so now then I'm at least going to take out the spotlight. So there's a high increase in the frequency of cyber attacks and climate impacts. So let's begin with the climate impacts. We're seeing higher amount of storms, flooding, droughts. All of these pose challenges and major risks to energy infrastructure. Projects have a lot of climate variability. The weather is not as stable as it used to be. And most of our focus needs to be on how to ensure energy security, specifically in renewables, given the variability and the intermittency of the resources. On the other hand, something that I did mention was the fact of cyber attacks. How do these come into play in this 2024? Basically, there's been so many cases, at least 17 that I can count of over the past 6 years, of interruption of functioning power plants or even blackouts due to cyber intrusions. So this is the new normal. This is something that we need to get used to. And basically, extreme weather events and cyber attacks are things that we will be seeing more often in the energy transition and that we need to address. So most of the cyber attacks and the latest cyber attacks are targeting utility companies specifically in their internal control systems. I don't know if you guys remember, but a couple of years ago, I think it was 3 or 4 during COVID, there was a major issue of a gas pipeline being hacked in the US. Not the actual pipeline, but actually the internal control system. So these actually are issues that can cause several penalties in the revenues and also in our operations. On the other hand, geopolitical tensions. Geopolitical tensions are increasing in a daily basis. 10 years ago, we had a, let's say, semi-normal situation with obviously some tensions, but today there is no place in the world where we cannot say that there are no tensions affecting the investment and the energy sector. For instance, the Russia-Ukraine war. The Russia-Ukraine war caused energy supply chain disruption. There's been a lot of sanctions that the EU has made to Russia. This affected the energy prices, affected bringing volatility. It affects the end consumers. And also in these scenarios, if nothing is sorted, investing activity will drop. And the geopolitical tensions today in this year between the Middle East, the Russian-Ukraine war, the geopolitical tensions between the US and China, the geopolitical tensions that we are living within Latin as well, are actually causing supply chain disruption, delays for delivery, price volatility. It's very hard to forecast, and also affecting energy security. By the way, geopolitical tensions is also something that we can actually link to cyber attacks, because cyber attacks might occur as a consequence of geopolitical tensions. On the other hand, we have the decentralization of energy industry. So as long as we are decentralizing our energy sector, investing more on smart grids, on prosumer-based models, this technology is not only affecting and disrupting the generation of power, it's also bringing several concerns about reliability. This is where energy storage comes into play, and it's also linked to cyber attacks, because no one would like to be, let's say, in a hospital and run out of power. And this is something that we do need to guarantee. We need to guarantee energy security. And on the other hand, data-driven intelligence is the differentiator that we are using at the moment. Data is worth much more than energy itself. However, if this is positive, why do we mention that decentralization might be a risk? Decentralization increases the potential points of attack of cyber attacks. Decentralization increases the potential opportunities that we have to be, let's say, victims of ransomware. So at the moment, what we need to understand is we need to transform the energy sector. We need to transform the way we secure infrastructure. And this needs to accelerate because we're at a pace that these tensions, these challenges are getting worse in a daily basis. So these targets needs to be addressed, and the focus needs always to be on energy security and energy flexibility. We need to have secure energy systems. So how do we do that, and how does cyber attacks come into play? If we take a look at this, here we have a chart of the risk premiums and how the risk premiums during COVID started increasing, and also given the geopolitical tensions. This is Russian-Ukraine war, and here we have the geopolitical tensions of the Middle East. So there are several issues that are affecting the discount rates. Discount rates make projects more expensive. Making projects more expensive makes investors to invest less money into the projects or require, as higher risks, higher risk premiums. So if we take a look at the chart, we can see that between 2022 and 2023, the risk premiums actually peaked, and not also peaked, but they increased by 120%. This 120% increase affected bankability of several projects during last year. However, risk premiums are falling. Risk premiums already dropped by 30% year over year. And what is the reason behind it? Basically, the reason behind it is there's an increase in supply. An increase in supply of what? Basically on debt and also on insurance. So if we increase the supply, if the supply outmatches the demand, we're going to see price drops. For instance, all-in insurance premiums reached to 1.2% from 3% last year. And this is all in insurance for additional. When I mention 1.2% is actually 1.2% of the capex of the project. But also when I speak about risk premiums, we're talking about risk premiums affecting the cost of capital. So today, cyber attacks tend to affect the cost of capital depending on the countries and the type of insurance policy that we might get. But how do they affect it? We might see increase by 0.3%, 0.4% in the discount rate. Critical infrastructure might add up to 0.3%. And contingencies for geopolitical tensions might add up for 0.2, 0.5. So if we add these numbers up, we're speaking about 30 to 75 basis points spread, just considering cybersecurity, critical infrastructure, and geopolitical risk over the weighted average cost of capital. And this is something that we need to understand that affects project profitability. It affects also the discount rates and the levelized cost of energy. So this is basically like a vicious cycle. On the other hand, something that we can do to improve this is actually closing the infrastructure gap, but it's not that easy. Today, we can see that we have a 17% of investment gap between what we need for projects to reach financial close and what we are actually injecting into the projects. So there's a great gap. The gap affects more the energy sector than the ports. This is just for you to understand what's the difference between the infrastructure sector. When I speak about ports, I also speak about airports. But when we speak about energy, energy reflects a higher risk, at least for specific investment. So if we're considering the European Union targets, we will require 10 trillion for infrastructure, and we're currently facing around a 2 or 1.8 trillion annual gap until 2040. This is a lot of money that we're not able to finance. And we need to start integrating resilience measures for green projects. As I mentioned earlier, we learned this the bad way from the geopolitical tension with Russia. We cannot rely only in gas or oil imports, and we cannot rely on a solar panel without considering that it might have intermittencies, that there might be a cyber attack, and we need to address these issues in order to improve project finance transactions. So for you to understand, today, most of the projects are being financed through project finance transaction. This is actually a non-recourse debt with a ring fencing, normally using a 70-30% split. Green bonds are also another way of financing and closing this gap. However, the green bonds are very immature. This is not a very mature market, and this is not at the scale that we were forecasting 10 years ago that it would reach. So where is the market going and how are we getting finance for these sorts of projects? So these sorts of projects today are being mostly financed through public-private partnerships, PPP, together with blended finance. These can improve the leverage of the projects. And actually, PPP structuring has increased by 15% year over year. So there is a great need and a great facility for PPP transactions to invest in green and sustainable infrastructure, same as in cybersecurity and data intelligence. So we're reaching the end now. What I was, what I wanted to bring to the table now is actually how can we invest in a cost-effective way, and how can we finance energy transition projects? How can we get securing infrastructure? How can we get those investments guaranteed? So basically, in the short term, I believe that risk consulting is something that most banks are requiring. Prevention services, such as if we go to get a project finance for a green project, perhaps have you gotten any sort of additional insurance? Have you gotten risk any risk profile that I can see? And this is all things that we can compensate the potential losses through risk consulting. There's also, as I mentioned, there's a lot of governments improving the energy security and energy resilience. This is attracting more green investments, but however, as I mentioned earlier with the green bonds, this is not enough. Why? Because private investors are looking into risk-adjusted returns. So risk-adjusted returns will only be addressed if we can either do a proper risk assessment and mitigate those risks prior to going to the bank, or we can actually invest in, for instance, cybersecurity insurance. We can improve our insurance premium in order to increase our leverage potential of the project. And this is something that we do see in the midterm. In the midterm, we do believe that there's going to be critical infrastructure funds. And these funds will be key for reaching our 2030, 2040, and 2050 targets. Institutions are actually investing a lot of money, and they're offering guarantees that can be blended within public and private funds. And these guarantees are some sort of financial instruments that can improve the bankability. However, there is something that we do need to keep in mind, and I want to close my session with this because the 15 minutes have reached. And it's actually, we're going to need huge collaboration between sectors in order to manage risks. Most of our focus, and this is because most of the developers are engineers, we tend to think only on how to generate power. And we're not thinking on the ancillary services. We're not thinking on how can we ensure, as I said, part of the energy trilemma, not only the project needs to be sustainable, it needs to be affordable, but also the project needs to be secure. It needs to guarantee a certain amount of generation, that this is actually a basic need. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm open now for some Q&As. I'm terribly sorry that the webcam system is not working. It's not me, it's actually the Zoom. I can guarantee you that it would be a bit more dynamic if you can see the gestures that I'm making. It might be less monotonous than just listening to my voice. So I thank you all for your patience and understanding as well.
Maximiliano, thank you very much for the fantastic presentation. I think that kind of bring us a lot of questions that I want to share with you just in a moment. But before I go into those questions, I want to ask myself if it's possible for you to answer. You touch base on the insurance, right? And I see some difficulties right now on the premium insurance or even insurance in order to cover cyber because they see cyber becomes a loss business for them due to the fact there is many incidents happening, and I think they are not happy to cover every single aspect of the insurance. So that means that touching base on your assessment is mandatory that the companies start to wake up because the insurance is not going to be something they're going to be able to cover without you having a risk matrix. I mean, you being so many times in this industry, how do you see this risk assessment? And you mentioned about the bankability in order to provide incentives or money for these projects to be able to be concrete. How do you see the bankability and insurance in order to ask now for cyber? Since the regulations are getting tougher, we have like a cybersecurity bill in UK coming, which is a similar copy of NIS 2.0. So I'd like to ask you, how do you see that perspective from the due diligence perspective when the banks and also the insurance ask for?
So that's a very good question. So basically, it is true that insurance premiums were increasing. Actually, we saw that during the period 2021, 2023. The pandemic also drove not only an increase on potential risks, but also the cyber attacks. Cyber attacks started peaking and rising globally. And this is something that increased the risk premiums. However, the risk premiums managed to drop. And this is basically something that I believe that has to do with some insurance companies starting to offer and try to position in the market cyber risk. This, as I mentioned earlier, this increase of supply generated prices to go down. But there's also from from a company point of view, if I were developing a project, I can tell you that generation interruption, or actually power injection in the grid, is the biggest cost that I can lose if I have interruption of my service. That's the major threat. So I think that from a security perspective, it is true that it's required. From a financial perspective, I do believe that there's a lot of developers that are starting to invest in cybersecurity because, as I told you, the cost of service interruption and the penalties for not delivering the contracted amount is actually much bigger than the insurance risk premium plus the capex to just properly do an investment such as in a protection infrastructure, if that makes any sense.
No, it's a fantastic overview from the topic. So let me give you a few questions that comes on our chat here. So, in your view, what are the most important steps asset owner can take to improve resilience against both cyber threats and climate impacts in the energy infrastructure? I can give a little bit of a direction there, but Maximilian, do you want to share your thoughts first?
Okay, so with regards to the resilience and the integrated approach, normally I use around three to four steps. First, proper risk assessment and planning. So understanding where the vulnerability lies, what's not only the climate impact, but also what are the interdependencies between my cybersecurity system and my cyber system and the physical system. What are the parts of my plant that can be actually hacked? So this helps us create a proper integrated risk assessment and response plan. On the other hand, it would be, after doing that, it would be advisable to start understanding how to potentially mitigate those risks. And that's where cybersecurity measures come in. So we need to invest in technical controls, operational controls, and also on the physical infrastructure. So what are the security audits that we're going to do, the protocols, what type of system, the firmware, the continuous monitoring. This is not a one-time investment and one-time OPEX. This is something that it's recurring. You need to constantly monitor the industrial control systems to understand if everything is okay. And finally, it would be a matter of integrating and coordinating. So basically having a trained response team, having an integrated monitoring system, and just in case, most of the latest projects that I've seen, most of them have coordinated backup and recovery procedures. So these are basically the priorities. So I think that in the short term, it would be first focusing on proper risk assessment, then assessing which technology is the better to reduce that risk, and finally coordinating the response team and how we can, let's say, recover the procedure in case of a potential attack.
Yeah, I think for me, what I'm going to share here before we go into Patricia, and thank you very much as well, Maximilian. We should repeat this, webinar again, because I think the content share here is fantastic. I think what I can add is we've been into many sites in UK, Europe, across the entire kind of a globe, and we can see the same scenario. I can tell you that less than 1% of those sites has any level of a certain protection. And as we become a decentralized energy, a sustainable future, we are also not taking consideration on the cyber. And part of the NIST 2.0, as the cybersecurity bill that is still to be created, but is going, I see the incident response, as you mentioned, become like evident that you need it. The continued monitoring is so important because I see a lot of demand on the pen test, which we do help clients. However, once we do the pen test, they realize once that pen test is not something that is enough. Why? Because you are taking a blood exam of your site today, right? So and I think continuous monitoring is what is going to guarantee you a better visibility as the site goes, because every day is a different day on the internet. So if you don't take the real-time monitoring, you can do a pen test today, and in a week time or even the next day, this kind of a scenario can be changed. So I think it's kind of the follow-up and the continuous monitoring, which helps asset managers to actually control access into the assets and establish a better compliance regulations around that. And I think investors on top are willing to invest in companies that take better maturity on the cyber, because they know, in fact, a reputation damage and also an incident can kind of brings the operator and the owner in their knees. And I think that we see some situations here. That's a topic for another webinar, perhaps, in the incidents and how to recover, as you say, Maximiliano. But I just want to thank you for the presentation. There are certain questions that we're going to answer on the chat. I will share with Maximiliano here, as otherwise we don't have time for the next speaker to be talking. So I also would like to welcome Patricia. Patricia, I met you in Edinburgh, where we kind of did the first interview. Patricia is a very famous on managing director, multiple sites and asset manager in the industry as well. She knows very well the industry in Latin and Europe. So Patricia, welcome. I'm sorry that we have the problem with the camera. As I said, we might going to repeat this webinar again. And I just want you to share your screen and we start your presentation.
Perfect, no problem, Rafael. I'll do my best without the camera. I do think that with camera it's a bit easier to follow, but it is what it is, guys. I'll do my best, okay? I'm going to talk about cybersecurity in the energy sector. Like Rafael said, my name is Patricia Dares. I'm the general manager at 350 Renewables, which is a company that does, we've been in the energy industry for 20 years or so. We do due diligence and technical advice and commercial advice as well. And the focus is our niche market is Latin America, because we started there quite early. But I am from Spain. I have worked in the UK for 10 years or so. And I am now also working for our Footprints as commercial manager. Our Footprints is an engineering company, which was in several locations across the UK. With senior consultants with an international profile, plenty of experience in the UK, LATAM, and internationally. This is maybe for reference if anyone wants to ask me for more information on what we do or who we are, then I've got it here for reference. When I was asked about to give a talk for this webinar, one of the things that I really wanted to do was to bring real life examples of issues that have happened in real projects. And what I found was quite surprising, because generally I am a person that has a wide network, and I keep confidentiality with all of my clients, but they're generally quite open to sharing experiences, specific experiences. And when I ask about cybersecurity, I realized that that wasn't the case. I mean, this may come obvious to some, but I think there's a shame and a bit of a stigma attached to sharing that you have been a victim of a cyber attack, whether as a company or as a person. And I think this is a really important comment to put on the table, because I think it brings the human element to it, to the whole context. And what comes across that is quite clear is that this leads to an underreporting of events. When you have underreporting of events, the learning curve is lower than it should be. We are at the moment in a world where renewable energy already makes an important piece of our energy generation. At the moment, more or less, we have 20% of our energy that comes from electricity, that is electricity, and another 80%, which is fossil fuels. But what we're trying to do globally, and the tendency shows, is that we are tending to more electrification and more digitalization. And what it means is that electricity and grid and generation infrastructure, it's really critical to secure. Everything at the moment is tending to be more digitalized: transport, heating, appliances, the washing machine, the fridge, the car, the battery of the car, the electric charger, the shutters, the speakers, the temperature of the home. You name it, many of us have an Alexa, or like all our stuff is digital. If they take away our phones, we kind of unworkable. We can't do anything, right? In the context of electrification, cybersecurity is key. So what we have at the moment is that we have an ever bigger and bigger and bigger growing of devices that are subject to an attack. And a lot of the time, the cybersecurity is left with the manufacturers, which, initially, I've also talked to companies that do domotics, which is electronics for the home. And I asked them, well, what kind of cyber attacks have you suffered? And they said, well, we generally didn't used to do anything to start with. And then what we saw is that equipment that weren't encrypted were being attacked. And this pretty much deconfigure the whole home. Just so that you get an idea of what this means in real life. So you may have, for example, a sensor so that if your bath water overflows, it picks up that there's water on the floor and it shuts down the water. So you may end up with no water in your house just because you've been attacked, or no electricity, or no fridge, or no washing machine. This is some of the examples that I've seen online of attacks where it basically firmware updates led to breaking of photovoltaic chargers or EVs, and in some cases they led to actually them catching fire. So what's very important is that to be aware of the different levels of security that we have, and to be aware that the manufacturers are often one of the key pillars that a lot of companies are relying on getting this right, so that the devices are not hacked or reconfigured. This is a summary from the European Union agency for cybersecurity, which is called Enisa. They have a really good report that they take out every year, and I think it's worth reading. Tons of graphs. I've only been given 10 minutes to talk, so I'm not going to go through all of them. But I think what I wanted to show here is that about 3% of cyber attacks globally are on energy. And interestingly, something like 20% is on public administration services. So that's also very important because obviously the theft of data, it's massive and it has huge potential there. Or not even theft of data, just changing that data where, I don't know, our pension, social security, etc. maybe. But anyway, 3% of these attacks at the moment are in the energy sector. And I think this is important because with what I was saying earlier, with the bigger role of electricity, bigger role of electrification, this is becoming really quite critical to the functioning of nation states. If you look at up and coming markets, or maybe let's say, maybe not OECD countries or countries that have major growth, what we have is that they have a large number of immature companies. In some cases, more than 90% of the companies are not settled. They are quite new, and growing sectors are even most affected. And many regions have little regulations and policies regarding cybersecurity. So what does it mean? It means that we have very poorly defined responsibilities, many cyber attacks that are not even recognized, and the reporting is even poorer. And as I said, it's also, apart from a lot of the time not even being identified, even when it's identified, it's not reported. Technology is definitely going faster than regulation. That's normal. If you're a person that likes regulatory standards, normally what you like is that things stay the same, because that's what regulation people want to do, and there's a purpose to that, which is stability, right? And if you're a person that likes technology, you're normally the opposite. What you want is change and innovation, and these two things kind of need to go hand in hand. But what it means is that that regulatory environment often needs some time to catch up with technology, and by the time it does, it's already outdated. But the electricity market is catching on, even in developing markets. So I was quite surprised, for example, to find out that in Latin America, the Chilean transmission system operator has a standard on cybersecurity since 2020. In Colombia, the Consejo Nacional de Operación since 2021, and in Brazil, ANIL since 2021. I don't know how many people come from the electricity market, but the TSO is pretty much the entity that will manage all the different generators. They will make appropriate use of the transmission infrastructure. They will tell projects when to inject, and they will try to make a match between the demand and the supply of energy to ensure reliability of the system. So it's very important to identify that this infrastructure is absolutely vital to the nation, each nation, and there's a TSO in each country, right? Because this is a role that any country that uses electricity has. So what they've done, or what they've tried to do, is they've tried to identify different levels of threats, right? So they've tried to identify which ones are the absolutely critical bits in their service that cannot be touched. And that's not normally generators. Only big generators, more than 300 megawatts, would be considered there, or substations. But they also have medium level and low level threats that they have identified. The threats, just to summarize, are normally ransomware, malware, social engineering, threats against data, threats against availability. This is a massive one for security of electricity. There's lots of people that, for example, depend on electricity to live. Sometimes actually literally, in terms of their health depends on a machine that runs on electricity. So denial of service is a huge issue. Information manipulation, interference, supply, and then what we have as threats is supply chain attacks, state nexus actors, cybercrime actors, and private sector offensive actors and hacktivists. I think the interesting bit to discuss here when we talk about the standards, and this doesn't matter if it's in development markets or not, is that we need to be aware that this is a multidimensional problem, and people is one of the key pillars of it. People, technology, procedures, and reporting. But the people pillar, often in some critical infrastructure, doesn't get given the right amount of weight, I think. And they are they are often one of the key weak spots. So why I'm saying this is because I think training people is one of the big issues that often gets forgotten. We can have brilliant cybersecurity systems in place and procedures, but if our people are not good enough, or are not trained enough, or are not given the appropriate tools, they can still become the weakest link to the system. So the key here is to classify the critical infrastructure and its impact. So which one are the most important bits? So often in grids, you have automatisms which define when to send a signal for certain generators to kind of scale down their generation, just because you don't have enough transmission capacity. And obviously, if that link is broken, you may end up with, in the worst case scenario, blackouts, or several kind of generators that end up offline when they should be able to inject, with consequences that normally are lots of money. And then be clear on defining the responsibilities. So at the moment, the generators have an obligation to maintain cybersecurity at their plants and to do periodic reporting. Device security is very important. So in sort of renewable energy plants, things that can go wrong: structure control, SCADA, turbines, servers, network devices, power plant controllers, inverters, meteor stations, but also the network and the people, like I said. And it's very important to do a periodical review of the procedures, and to make sure that all of the events and all of the threats are being reported, because a lack of reporting leads to, obviously, these threats going on for much longer than they need to be. I'm not sure if I'm going to talk about this. Maybe I will anyway, but no, I have you heard about the Mecotio? This is a malware which is operating often quite a lot in LATAM. I'm not sure if it is. I mean, I'm sure there's very similar ones in Europe. It's just that this one in particular operates in LATAM. What they do is they send you an email with the header and obviously an email that looks legit, right? And it's normally an invoice. So in this case, it's for CGE, which is the distribution company. So it's an electricity invoice, and they just ask you to download a PDF. You open the PDF, it's dodgy, you close it, nothing. Oh, it's a zip file, you open it, it's dodgy, but nothing happens, you close it, and it looks like nothing has happened, and you delete it, and that's that. Nothing happens to your computer, nothing happens to anything that you've done. The program, in fact, stays dormant until the user goes to their bank page or their electricity company website, at which point it kind of mimics the website and redirects them to a different link where they can get all your personal information. So this twin website steals the user info, data, credit card details, and so on. I'm naming this, or I'm explaining this, because it's obvious that there's a lot of shame about reporting this. And generally, like I said, I find it very easy for people and for companies to share real life experiences and consequences. But this has been I think this is one of the major roadblocks that we find here. In terms of real impacts, I think the key here is that we are aware that we can potentially have a loss of electrical supplies, control blackouts, economic loss, but also as we electrify more, we could end up without transport because we don't have an electric car that is working, comms, heating, appliances. We can have loss of information, loss of revenues, and obviously a loss of operational control of the system or the generation, leading to, in the worst case scenario, to blackouts. So very important to kind of follow layered approach, which starts with the component, with the software, with the device, securing our networks, and then having obviously physical barriers and policies and procedures that protect the whole value chain. That's basically it. So thanks very much for your attention. And if there are any questions, do let me know.
No, I think it's amazing. I think, Patricia, thank you very much for sharing. Once again, sorry about the camera situation here. So we're definitely going to organize another event. I think there's been a lot of communication as well from our guests. Thank you very much. We are sharing some PDFs, and also the presentations will be shared with you after when we finalize this event. I think for me, Patricia, it's quite good to understand as well that is not only Europe or South America or North America. It's about the globe, right? So from the incidents that you highlight there, it shows that cyber activity is a global situation and a problem. And renewables becomes kind of the new currency where the hackers are trying to extract money from it. I think it's important to drag attention because the energy now becomes a new currency in this market, and wherever there is a money involved, gangs will be around in order to create extortion or ensure that you have kind of paying kind of in bitcoins or whatever money they decide to pay. So I think for us is what we see from the industry is still lots of opportunities in this industry. AI will change quite significant the amount of data that's going to fly, and therefore I think the demand on renewables is only going to increase. And I think for us is we want to ensure that, yes, we want to become and ensure the world is become sustainable, however, with the right protection and measures in place. At the moment, we don't see that. And that is the one of the issue that we start to have. And I think, believe me, in the NIS 2.0, I think what is going to be changing that is quite significant for me, and I want to highlight those items are four. And I think that is very important. The number one is directors will be personally liable for not having the cyber hygiene. So this is one of the key points and changes from the 1.0 to the 2.0. Two, the company, the owner might be losing the license of operation depending on the scale of the attack. So, for example, if you have a biomass situation where you have a cyber attack and there are people working there in perhaps there is a security incident transitioning to be a safety condition, you probably could be even taking risks of lives on your hands, because the cybersecurity today is a digital environment where anyone can be attempt to break into your systems, right? So we see situations on biomasses, we see situations on hydropower, on in every single asset classes, we see problems arising. I think the second point is losing the license, as I said. The third one is actually you need to have a monitoring in place. As I mentioned before, it's nothing to do with just risk. Risk is important for you to mitigate. I think it is kind of a north direction, but how you keep the eye watching your assets. You spend millions building the assets. You have O&M, you have asset manager, you have all the needs to cover the aspects of generation. But remember, the internet, which is connected to your asset, is not protected. And how you protect that? So what is the point for you to have all these management bodies managing the asset itself, but a hacker can break into just a single internet and compromise the entire SCADA system, in therefore breaking or making a grid problems depending on the asset that we have, right? And I think the fourth critical point that needs established is the incident response. So for us, from the Cyber Energia side, we see those four items need to be in front of you, because at the end of the day, what needs or any regulation that is coming, they are not asking you to have a big kind of a cybersecurity team. They are not asking you to invest millions on that field. They are asking you just to have the basic. And today, most of the company doesn't have even the basic. And that's why we are here to help, I think, to offer the basic cyber hygiene in order for you to visualize every need from your portfolio. So as I say, if one wind farm costs you millions, how much is going to cost you when the gang of hackers take control? And this is not something that I'm saying is already happening, right? We see cases of wind farms being compromised, 11 gigawatts. There was a compromise in 2022. We see JBS. So this is going to start to increase. Therefore, the statistics is not quite good sometimes because most of the incidents sometimes get swept under the carpet. And as the regulation gets more in place, then we will see a better statistics, a better control, a better education, and a better share and maturity from this industry. So I think I want to thank everyone for coming to this webinar. We're definitely going to have more webinars. I just want to apologize in advance for the camera situation that we have today. But nevertheless, I think this event was amazing to get everyone on board and discussing cybersecurity. This is just the beginning of cybersecurity in every single scale, as we could see today with Maximiliano talking about the bankability, talking about the insurance, talking about how is kind of the geographic politics is kind of a change in the entire world, and how cyber becomes very strategic for companies to take control and protect the assets. So I think, look, I really appreciate your time. If you have any questions, please drop us an email and feel free to join us in other seminars that we have. By the way, on the 23rd of October, we're going to have an on-prem event. So if you want to come around and have some drinks and meet the team, it's a good opportunity for you guys to come to the office in London and meet us. So please coordinate with Faye. Faye can actually help you to come here, see the team, see what we have, meet us, having kind of a nice drinks and understand a little bit of our project and our initiative. Thank you very much for your help. Thank you, Maximiliano. Thank you, Patricia, for the help. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. And I see you next time.
Thanks very much. Get up soon. Bye.